The story's protagonist is Albert, who was reincarnated into the kingdom of Alexa and was appointed the youngest priest by virtue of his wisdom. This was all thanks to the knowledge he had acquired from his past life and the remaining memories. In this world, he was blessed with the ability to see the numerical potential of others and was favored by the king and his officials. However, Albert made the grave mistake of announcing that the third prince, Orgis, had zero potential. Naturally, this prince was popularly known as the foolish prince who used his status to oppress women. He had even asked for Albert's servant girl so he could milk her dry, but Albert rescued her from the tyrant. As a punishment for his verdict on the prince's stats, Albert was demoted to a trainee priest and ordered to carry out missionary work in a certain district. The older priests yelled at him and insulted him, and even though Albert appealed to the king directly, his appeal was crushed by the head priest, who cut ties with Albert and colluded with the third prince. Finally, Orgis sent Albert off to work on the frontier, which was full of bandits. It was through this experience that Albert landed in the hands of a woman who recruited him as her military strategist because of his wisdom. When he analyzed her stats, Albert noticed that the famous bloodthirsty demon Merida, who was the strongest warrior of the demi-human kingdom and a former noble, deserved her flowers. She possessed such beauty and extraordinary talent, but Mary had the brain of an ostrich, so Albert used her dumbness to his advantage. He told her that he was a priest belonging to the kingdom of Alexa, and so, being kidnapped and being forced to work for her meant he could leave, and there would be no loose ends. Soon, they struck a deal, and she took him back to the mercenaries' base, where he reunited with his servant girl Alicia, who had been transformed from an innocent priestess to a veteran role-play nun. She said she was dressed that way to save his life because he had saved hers when she was going to be kidnapped by the third prince, Orgis. Mary acknowledged that she was the one who dressed Alicia like that in a maid's uniform, confirming the rumors about her obsession with cute girls. However, she said it wasn't only cute girls like Alicia that she had an eye for, but innocent boys like Albert. Before the boy knew it, she hopped on his ding-dong, saying she was going to sample him. Having traumatized Albert enough, she invited Alicia to join in, and both girls dealt with Albert in every likable way. Thanks to his experience in his past life, Albert knew exactly how to direct that orchestra, and the rest was history for the night. Afterward, Mary said that Albert was such a deviant who knew the body map of a woman. He claimed it was only natural since he was a priest of the Palace of Wisdom, so Mary demanded that he give her one more round. First, Albert asked her if she truly had kidnapped him because she needed his wisdom for the Alantia Empire. Then he wanted to know why she was banished to the enemy country of Alexa. When she was done narrating, Albert realized that this lady was the personification of crazy. She had almost executed the fiancé recommended by the Demon King and sent him packing back to his family, all because the guy was an ugly fatso who was physically repulsive. That, in turn, got her a punishment from the head of her fiancé's family, who stripped her of her position and banished her. Albert told Mary that he was surprised to see her head on her neck after what she had done. So she said that it was all thanks to her close relationship with the Demon King, who was almost like a blood brother. Factoring everything she said into consideration, especially that Mary was close to the Demon King, and the strength of her mercenary group was powerful and known in all the kingdom, Albert knew that this could play to his own advantage. He asked her if she knew of a trusted noble who could mediate with the Demon King, to which Mary replied that her sister's husband was a margrave called Stefan. Albert leaned in and whispered an exciting plan, and he said he would prepare a certain letter right away. But spontaneously, Mary said that she had decided that she liked Albert enough to want him as a husband. However, her only condition was that he permit her to take mistresses. Albert was shocked because that should be his line, but Mary said that even though he was the only man she needed, she loved cute girls too much to stay without them, and if he agreed for her to have them, then they could enjoy the ladies together as a couple. Again, Albert reflected on his decision, realizing that being Mary's husband granted him more authority and freedom, rather than serving as her subordinate, and if she could return to the Empire, then he would attain the success he had in his plans. He eventually told her that he would love to become her husband, and he swore to be of great service to her. Just then, Alicia asked if she could be a lover to both of them, and Mary didn't hesitate to accept the girl, based on the results of their experiments the previous night. A week later, Albert received a reply to the letter he sent and told Mary to gather all the mercenaries at the square. When the preparations were complete, everything rested in Albert's ability to handle that bunch of ruffians. The top goon among them said it was obvious Albert was having fun all night and he was super jealous. Albert replied to the guy, saying Mary wouldn't stop returning for more, while Alicia had more stamina than a Red Bull. All the guys wore goofy expressions on their faces, glad that there was finally one man who could tame their feisty princess. But Mary took this as a reproach to her dignity and said that even though Albert seemed mostly lewd, he was certainly smart. However, the guys said they were just shocked that their bloodthirsty princess had fallen so hard for a regular guy. Now, Albert was glad because at least it seemed the guys didn't hate him. He had heard that the bonds within the Elwyn mercenary group were extraordinary, but it was all probably because they were captivated by Mary's charm. One of the thugs asked Albert to confirm that they would be able to return to the land of Elancia. Albert confirmed it, saying he had just sent a mediation letter through Mary's brother-in-law and had successfully received permission from the Demon King to return to their kingdom. However, they would have to take both the heads and territories of the 3 border lords on the side of the kingdom of Alexia. The mercenaries said seizing the border territories would cause other opportunistic border lords to oppose the empire. But Albert said that if it was the imperial army led by the Demon King, that was probably right. However, they were a group of mercenaries already in the field, and if they destroyed the lord's forces and the imperial army took over the empty castle, no one would complain. Moreover, their targets were 3 notorious lords who oppressed the people with heavy taxes, people hunting, and slave trading. Such lords were fond of switching allegiance to the winning side during war, and as a result, they were shunned even within the kingdom of Alexa and thus had no backup. In other words, this plan was something only the elite of the Elwyn mercenary group could accomplish, and undoubtedly, Mary's return and the restoration of her status as a noble would be achieved. This gained the confidence of all the mercenaries, and they cheered in unison. Mary led her troops to the first town, Bania, where they raided the territory lord's castle. The palace guards called her a bandit scum when she said she was seizing the castle, but she smiled and told them to quit yapping, and thereafter destroyed the main gate with one swing of her sword. The next thing they knew, the captain's head was smashed with a rock from a distance, and all the guards were getting shot one after the other. With all the damage going on, Mary maintained her smile, looking like Barbie possessed by Annabelle's spirit, while she promised to destroy the entire castle and chop everyone's head off. Her confidence was inspired by a discussion she had with Albert some days back, when he gave her 3 main rules for the upcoming castle siege. The first rule was that she should not execute unarmed citizens. The second was that there would be no unnecessary property damage. And the third was that there would be no looting, because they would distribute whatever they found in the corrupt lord's castle to the citizens. Mary protested that the rules were too strict and that looting and violence were just part of war. But Albert told her that if they were doing things that way, then their return to the empire would be impossible. Now, even though Mary wasn't against the rules, she shared that it would be difficult getting the others to follow the rules. However, he told her that the castle and all its inhabitants were supposed to be a gift to the Demon King, and he asked her if she would be happy receiving a broken gift. He did tell her that even if he wasn't happy about what he said, giving a broken gift would not only prevent them from returning to the empire, but also prevent her from expecting any nighttime duties from him. With that, Mary was convinced to implore her boys to follow the rules, and that anyone who broke any of them would be dealt with by her personally. Going forward, they acted as discussed and dealt with the armed guards who showed resistance while sparing those who surrendered. Some of the guys still remained stupid and thought it would be a good idea to resist Mary and her boys, and one of them finally showed up, the biggest of them all, saying she had done a good job getting rid of the smaller boys, but he, Bazin, who was the bear of the frontier, would lead to her demise. Bazin lifted his axe, prepared to slice Mary in half, but he was met with her long sword and a pretty face that didn't even flinch. Before he knew it, Mary was slicing right through his axe and eventually through his body, which she broke in half as well. The other guys were terrified, as Mary said this wasn't a warm-up when they had with their own eyes seen their hero get defeated in one hit. In any case, Mary was informed that they had successfully suppressed the castle city, and those who laid down their arms were detained in the square. The ones left behind were the corrupt lord and his family, who had been barricaded in the manor. Leading the forefront was Mary and her right-hand man. As she confronted the bald lord, she told him they would be relieving him of his castle when he asked her who the heck she was. But with her sword pointed at his throat, the idiot surrendered, asking her if she was after money and to show him mercy. Without considering his ugly requests, Mary punched the old fool and liberated his teeth from his rotten mouth, sending them flying in all directions. However, she wasn't satisfied and said she was going to take his head too. But he told her that even if his castle fell, one of his 2 corrupt companions would send reinforcements. But Mary shocked him when she informed him that his companions had already fallen because her beloved strategist was handling the cleanup and would be there soon. Speaking of the devil, Albert soon showed up, saying the castle had already fallen. Mary showed him that she had gathered all the prisoners and valuables, and so he told her it was time for her speech. To Mary, there was nothing more cringeworthy than watching a muscle brain deliver a TED talk, but she would do anything for her darling and for the restoration of the empire. She went on to announce that the evil lord who committed injustice, exploited the citizens, and amassed huge personal wealth had been defeated by the Irvine mercenary group. She also announced to the citizens that the confiscated wealth would be equally distributed between all citizens, as was the will of His Majesty the Demon King. From that day onward, the land would be an imperial territory, and it would be governed justly and impartially. Excited, the once oppressed citizens all chanted praises, extolling the Demon King's empire and the Demon King himself. Albert, the mastermind of everything, was also feeling fulfilled, seeing that they had converted the regular citizens into imperial royalists without any costs to the empire. They also collected the wages meant for the soldiers while distributing the wealth to the citizens as promised. Even so, he felt he had underestimated the strength of the Elwyn group, especially Mary, who was like a cheat character, and surpassed both the rumors spread about her strength and Albert's expectations. Now it was time for him to put in hard work, as his own part to play had presented itself, and he would start by cleaning up after the muscle-brained mercenaries. A week later, Mary and her guys arrived at the kingdom of Alancia, and she was welcomed by her brother-in-law, Margrave Stefan von Belleria. He told her that her sister, Lee, was also glad and overjoyed at her return, and then he exchanged pleasantries with Albert, whom Mary introduced as her husband. However, Stefan didn't fail to express his confusion at the fact that Mary nearly killed her fiancé, who was sent by His Majesty the Demon King himself, only for her to settle with an ordinary fool like Albert. Albert wasn't surprised because this man was a powerful noble of the empire whose stats were quite high, and even though the guy had a friendly demeanor, he was a little intimidating deep down. Mary defended Albert by saying the liberated citizens were overjoyed at becoming an imperial territory, all thanks to the amazing Albert. He attested to what she said, saying they were greeted by delighted locals on the way and noticed that the surrounding area seemed to be recovering well. Stefan admitted he wouldn't have dreamt up such a brilliant strategy and asked Albert to come work for him. But Mary said that even if Stefan was her father, there was no way he would have her beloved Albert. Even Albert, deep down, didn't want to work for Stefan, because the guy seemed like the type who would overwork his subordinates so he could have a soft life. Stefan said that he would leave the persuasion of a certain Lord Preston to Albert, and Albert started melting at that moment, because the man in question was the head of their family and Mary's uncle. Mary confirmed that her former territory, Ashley, was now governed by her uncle, and for her to return to imperial nobility, she would have to take back her former territory from him first. Albert wasn't having it because this man was known on the battlefield as the Crimson-Speared Demon and called the Mad Dog of Elwyn by his own allies, so even Mary didn't stand a chance against him. Stefan worsened matters by chipping in that Preston, even gave the Demon King a run for his money, but he seemed convinced that Albert would be able to maneuver his way around the powerful man. Seeing that he could not avoid this anymore, Albert told Mary that if he did his best, she would have to wear the hot underwear he bought for her later that night. Because his own dream was to live with his beautiful wife, have their own territory, and be surrounded by more cute women. Finally making up his mind, He agreed to persuade her uncle, and she hugged him excitedly, saying she was counting on him. Meanwhile, in the kingdom of Alexa, at the residence of the third prince, Orgis, the seal showed him raving and ranting at Albert in absentia, saying he had gotten them into trouble because the king would soon be informed of their shady business dealings, as Albert had sent another letter to the king that stated all the accusations and allegations against him. He had sent the letter to the second prince, and soon that prince would inform the king. So Orgis wanted his guys to act immediately. The plan was to return to their territories right away and dispose of any evidence. But they were shocked to find out from Prince Orgis that 3 territories had been seized by the empire. Since there were no liabilities to him, and they would be dealt with accordingly, he ordered his guards to arrest the corrupt lords and pin all the blame on them. His temporary plan would be to lie low for a while, but that would be all because of Albert, who remained a pain in his neck. Finally, Prince Orgis ordered a bounty for Priest Albert because he wanted him dead. Meanwhile, Albert was no longer at home, leaving just Mary and Alicia, but Alicia did unspeakable things to Mary, following instructions that Albert had left her with. At the Azure Castle in Elwyn territory, Albert bowed before Lord Preston, introducing himself as Mary's husband. Her terrifying uncle accused Albert of deceiving the princess to become her lover and strategist, sneaking into the empire, and going to relieve Preston from his position as lord. However, Albert said he wished to discuss something. Before he knew it, Preston had drawn out his spear and had it on Albert's neck, asking him if he really thought he was going back home with his head. The move was so fast that he didn't notice when Preston had gotten up, but Albert knew that only one wrong move was needed, and his head would be rolling. So he begged Preston that if he allowed him to assume command, then he would raise the Elwyn family to the highest of nobility. Preston called him a wretched human, asking what a skinny brat like him hoped to accomplish. So Albert said that first he will tame Mary, take care of the domestic and foreign affairs intelligence, and then free Preston from all the burden of running his territory. That way, Preston and Mary could focus on war, elevating them both to become the greatest generals in the empire. A moment of silence ensued between both men, and Preston burst out laughing heartily, saying that was precisely what he expected from the man who could tame his wild horse of a niece, and that Albert was just who they needed in the family. He further confessed that being a lord didn't suit him, and he would much rather be on the battlefield. Thus, if Albert could really tame Mary, then he would step aside for him. Albert said he was willing to stake his life to prove that he could make it work, so Preston smiled, saying that even though his niece was a crazy horse, she was the very best, and all he wanted from Albert was to transform Mary into a powerful general. Firstly, Albert asked if Mary was hated within the empire, and her uncle admitted that there was no single soul retainer who didn't hate Mary because she was quite crazy and almost like a goddess of war. As such, everyone was way too soft on her, and only Preston mustered the courage to be strict with her. But since Albert was her husband and a wise man, Preston was willing to leave Mary's discipline in his hands. With everything being sorted, Preston said it was time to celebrate, and he had sent a horse to bring Mary to her territory to join the party. The party started, and Mary cried for more expired juice while her uncle urged Albert to drink to his fill, even though he was a man who couldn't hold his liquor. Some demon folks thought that Albert, being the one who stole Mary's heart, was way too skinny and probably couldn't satisfy her. It was Preston's wife, Freya, and his son, Rather, both of whom welcomed Albert warmly and told him to feel free to be informal with them. Soon, Rather took to the stage, announcing that the demon tribe strength competition was about to begin, and the star of the show was obviously Mary's groom, Albert. Albert was about to piss his pants because, obviously, he didn't even know what a gym looked like, not to mention participating in such a competition. But Rather told him that anyone marrying into the demon tribe got to choose the type of battle they were interested in fighting, because it was their tradition to show strength in conflict. Mary confirmed what the boy was saying, telling Albert that it was only a formality and he wouldn't die. However, she highlighted that strength was of the utmost value to the demon tribe. And if he didn't impress them with his strength, the worst that would happen would be that no one would obey him. Albert couldn't take this gamble because, as a military strategist, that was the difference between life and death. But Mary said that she already knew how great her husband was, and even if he lost, she would convince everyone of how outstanding he really was. At this point, Albert was shaking and shivering, and Rather told him to quickly decide the type of battle he wanted. Albert asked if there were any restrictions, and Rather said there weren't because other demons even said he could choose anything because demons would never go back on their word. With that, Albert presented a writing tablet and proposed a writing battle with his pen serving as his weapon since he was a civil servant. Even though that wasn't quite what the demons were expecting, Mary reminded them that they had to accept Albert's challenge since demons would go back on their word. However, Mary wondered why, in the first place, she was participating in that writing battle. Her uncle asked her if she was trying to run away like a coward, but she lied, saying there was no way she would be terrified of some cheap writing battle. Alicia, the referee of the match, showed everyone their writing topic, but the poor demons all suffered. Even a man as powerful as Preston confessed that his hand was already breaking out in a rash because he was allergic to intelligence. His son said the brush felt so heavy it was like he was lifting a rock. Actually, the demon tribe was pretty proficient at writing, because creating maps and reports required immense concentration. However, when asked to do something out of the norm, it became extremely painful for them. While they were complaining, Albert had finished the first piece. Mary broke down crying, saying she was literally forced to do it, while Rather said it felt like his head was spinning. Preston said his vision was fading and admitted that he had lost. So all three demons passed out, and Albert was declared the winner. That concluded his great victory, and he wrote quotes for 700 people within an hour. By the time he had handed them out, he had gained the full trust of the demon tribe, which helped him in more than just one way. One day, things got heated up between the Prestons. Rather insulted his father, calling him a dumb old man, while Preston said his son was an idiot. They got into a full-blown fight and were interrupted by Albert, who asked them what was going on, but both of them blamed each other for starting the fight. However, Albert reminded them that fighting in the castle was strictly forbidden, especially between the two of them, because they could cause considerable damage. Preston begged that he didn't want to be sent to the special personal reflection room. This was one of the many established forms of discipline instilled by Albert to manage the Elwyn territory effectively. Those who broke the rules, no matter who, were made to sit in a windowless room, bolt upright, and write until their fingers were sore. It soon became known as the personal reflection room, where they would be forced to write that they would act thoughtfully, and all of them feared it greatly. Since both father and son seemed repentant, Albert directed Preston to repair the wall while instructing Rather to tend to the farm. In that way, Albert had somehow made the demon tribe, who valued strength above all else, follow instructions. Next, he moved on to the territory management plan. The Ashley Castle was built at a strategic point along the carriage highway, which was a trade hub that many merchants passed through. To the north of this was the fertile Greenlands, which produced 80% of the Empire's food. Even for the Empire, that was a very prosperous area and a critical defense point. The only reason such an important area was given to such a low-ranked family, such as the Elwyn family, was that their combat abilities were unmatched. In times of peace, it was a prosperous region that was easy to manage, and so Albert decided to take over the management affairs of the region. However, to do that, he required the basic revenue tax ledger, but it seemed Preston had no idea what the ledger was, and Albert was furious that the man hadn't kept the documents up to date, asking Preston how he managed the territory up until that time. Preston harshly burst out laughing, saying he would let the village chief and merchants store things in warehouses and safes, as they wanted, so that if there was a shortage during war, he would collect taxes. All Albert was hoping for was that there were ledgers for all of this, but Preston only had a bunch of things containing an inventory of military supplies and a map of potential battle sites. He felt stupid for expecting any admin skills from the demon tribe, and decided he would go over the documents himself and prepare the ledgers. He asked Preston for the treasury and was directed to the underground part of the castle. Preston added that there was a lavish banquet recently held and other expenses that might have taken a lot out of the treasury. At the Ashley Castle treasury much later, Albert was granted access to it, but arrived to see that there was absolutely nothing left, making him understand that he had underestimated the wild nature of the demon tribe. The next day, Albert put Mary on a stamping duty because it was the duty of the head by law, but the procedure required physical power that he didn't have. However, because he made her stay there going through mountains of paperwork, she was upset, saying he was a sadist who loved to watch her suffer. Eventually, she had her way and got out, and he told her to return home before dinner. Later, Alicia served him, asking about the financial situation of the castle. He shared that the treasury was quite empty, and there were debts worth almost 50,000 gold coins due to the sloppy management and too many retainers. A baron's household usually had about 50 people, but the Elwyn household had 200, mostly in place to protect key locations. Thankfully, they had 5,000 gold coins in reward money, so they would have to tighten their belts while organizing the domestic affairs of the household. Albert felt he would die from exhaustion by handling all the issues alone, so Alicia sympathized with him, saying she wished she could be of more help. He told her she was already doing well and to continue forming their information network. After a few more pieces of paperwork, Albert visited the food warehouse, noticing there was a crazy amount of food. The warehouse manager explained that it was because there weren't any recent wars and that some of the food had already begun spoiling, so they had to do something about it as soon as possible. The guy explained that the demon tribe only used it in times of need, and that they had been entrusted with it by the chiefs of each village. Albert realized that this man had excellent admin skills and had kept the stock items in exact order, so he felt the man's talent was being wasted. He then asked the guy what he felt the top priority for the Elwyn family should be. So Melvis said that maintaining the various ledgers would help significantly, and reducing waste would benefit them greatly, because such a rich territory would only help the Elwyn family to flourish. After hearing his intelligent conclusions, Albert suggested that Melvis become the family administrator. Melvis wanted to protest it, but Albert let him know that he was the ruler over all internal affairs. And in addition to his warehouse manager salary, he would pay him a wage as an administrator. With that, Melvis accepted the terms of his new employment, and Albert asked him if he had any buyers lined up for any of the unnecessary inventory they had. Melvis said he would handle everything the following day, contacting the merchants in all the towns immediately. Even though it would be nearly impossible to move out all the goods in one day, Albert said he had a plan. The next day, Mary called her demons together, saying they had a training to see which squad could transport the most goods out of the warehouse, and the winning squad would be entrusted to be the vanguard in the next battle. Her people were all excited, especially Rather and his father and Mary herself. They collected some of the items and instructed which one of them would be taken out, while warning them not to mix the colors up. While Melvis watched this, he couldn't believe that Albert had somehow made Mary, under the guise of training, to help clear out the warehouse with her guns. In fact, Rather was so excited that his squad was in the lead, but Mary and Preston weren't slowing down either. In the end, all three of them felt they were winners. Alicia acted as the referee again and proceeded to count the boxes while offering the demons refreshment. Also, Melvis remained shocked that the warehouse was emptied in half a day, so Albert told him that the demons had done their job, and now it was their turn to work, so he should call the merchants over. When he did, the slightly damaged food was sold at a low price, and the boxes marked in red contained spoiled food that was sold to farmers as fertilizer. Among the merchants who attended was a particularly competent-looking wine merchant who was given a slight discount to establish a good business relationship with Albert. That day, Albert and Melvis sold 3,000 coins in food and drink alone, and with Melvis at the helm, the staff members. Various accounts had started progressing smoothly, so soon enough, Albert was getting overwhelmed with work and said he needed a secretary. Alicia already had various roles and was more than capable, but was a commoner who was unable to read and write, so he only wished to know if there were OnlyFans girls he could hire as secretaries. Putting that aside, he resolved to visit the Merchants Guild to solve the next pressing issue. He was welcomed by a man called Renville, who told him that the standard measurements for width and length were inconsistent because there were so many merchants coming and going, and that had led to so many disputes. However, Albert told him to rest assured because he had a solution that he might like. That was an instrument, a piece of measuring equipment, which Albert and the rest of the Elwyn family owned and had created with their Elwyn family crest. The standards were created by Lady Mary herself, so Albert told Renville to recreate and sell them through his merchants' guild, saying also that they would be posting notices that any transactions made without using that system would be severely punished. Renville was pleased and enthusiastically affirmed that they would endorse the measuring equipment through the trade association while resolving any long-standing disputes. In his excitement, he called a girl named Irina to bring Albert a celebratory drink. The first thing Albert saw when the girl arrived was the golden globes, so he asked the girl who she was. Apparently, Irina was Renville's daughter, and the girl possessed higher stats than her father. Thereafter, Renville asked Albert what he thought of his daughter after hearing that Albert was looking for staff at the Elwyn Castle. He felt his daughter was exceptionally capable, and Albert said he was looking for an excellent secretary to assist him. Irene responded, saying that she felt like a perfect fit based on Lady Mary's standards and felt it would benefit the family greatly, because she knew that Albert valued competent staff and women. She felt she would also fit in not only as a lover, but also that Albert would supply her with high-quality protein. When he heard that the girl had done her homework, he told her that he was looking forward to working with her. Later that night, Irene presented herself in the underwear Mary had given her to perform her nightly duties. Immediately, Mary kicked off to explore her, and Alicia joined in until finally Mary concluded that Irene was good enough for Albert. In the morning, Irene showed up in her uniform and submitted the papers Albert had requested. Mary couldn't get over how hot Irene was, but Albert warned the girl to keep her hands off his secretary. Later, Albert inspected the official measuring instrumentation and found that in the castle town, people were already conducting business using this system because everyone respected and feared the demon tribe and was not about to mess things up by not using the right measurements. This showed how much weight the Elwyn family scales carried when merchants were reassured, as Lord Renville kept a close eye on transactions. However, Albert wasn't sure whether the system could improve the taxation problem. This was because the local lords had been neglecting internal affairs for so long, and taxes were only paid at the discretion of the village chief. Hence, there was never any delay in paying everyone because everyone fed the demon tribe, but they had been using a lax measurement system. This would fatten their pockets, making the village chief and their family's strength grow every day. In times of war, the village chief would become the commander of the local army after conscription, and if they had issues with the measurement system, the chiefs may band together and start an uprising. According to the merchants, skirmishes at the borders were becoming more frequent, and it would be no surprise to Albert if a war broke out soon. Of course, this made him only want to stabilize internal affairs now more than ever before, and the perfect solution to the problem might be to offer them both a reward and a punishment, but more of a punishment. Later, Albert visited the village chief of the Northern Irwin territory and asked him how far business had been moving using the certified measuring equipment. The old man said that even though they were abandoning the previous taxation obligations, asking them to suddenly change methods they had been sticking to was a little stressful. But Albert said he was also a civil servant in the service of the Dingman tribe, so he understood what the old man meant in terms of difficulties. In light of that, Albert and Mary agreed to overlook the previous benefits the village chief was receiving during the taxation collections. The old man was shocked beyond belief as he had been exposed, so Albert continued saying that he and Mary had discovered that during wartime, such benefits of the village chief would be necessary to prevent famine. So they were looking to increase the number of civil servants employed. The first thing would be that they would give their sons and daughters priority for such positions, and this discovery made the village chief point out how thorough both Albert and Mary were. Prior to his visit, Albert heard that the village chief had previously tamed the Crimson Princess, and so it was a little scary to approach the man, but seeing how he was easy to discover, Albert thought the man was just a boy who could easily be deceived. However, Albert confessed that there was a slight problem because he had tried successfully and persuaded Mary, but not her uncle. That instant, Preston coincidentally broke down the door and burst into the house, angrily looking for the old, stupid man who had been deceiving him. The chief almost pissed his pants in fear and terror of Preston, so Preston told him that since his village usually had quite a great harvest, he would have to hand over an emergency tax payment to them. The old man obviously could not contest that and Preston warned him further, saying he tended to break the necks of people who deceived him. This terrified the village chief, and he promised that he could not even conceive the idea of being so stupid. Albert had to beg Preston not to behead the poor man by simply squeezing his neck too hard. And so the village chief met Albert, reminding him that he had promised to look over his discrepancies. Albert said that he and Mary had agreed to forgive his sins, but certainly not the former governor, Preston, because the demon tribe had no tolerance for liars and cheats. The village chief trembled, asking Albert what he could do, so Albert said that if he wouldn't mind submitting his ledger, that would solve the problem. With shock in his eyes, the old man asked what ledger at all, and Albert simply smiled, saying that when the time came for the village chief to be replaced, his son should be brought up to speed on the village's finances and situation. It seemed his village chief didn't want to bring the ledger, but Preston wasn't having it and told him to bring it right away. A week later, Albert had managed to gather all of the village ledgers. So Irene was impressed and asked him how he had managed to achieve this. He simply said he asked the old men nicely, and they just handed it over. But even Irene knew that Albert had used Preston's intimidation techniques to extract the ledgers from them. For those who submitted without delay, Albert promised not to hold them accountable and grant them immunity from any inheritance task. Albert had successfully redirected any form of discontentment towards the chief, as he had hired the chief's children, making them hostages of a sort. The reason for no uprisings in the territory was all thanks to the famous combat ability of the Elwyn family, but preventative measures also had to be taken. So, after Albert had the ledgers scrutinized by Melvis, it turned out the villages had more than doubled the reported income. The underpaid taxes were collected by the demon tribe, and surprisingly, were paid in full without any outstanding issues. As a result, the finances of the Elwyn family were restored. Melvis was assigned as the Lord of Ledgers and quickly became the chief internal affairs officer who dealt with financial matters. Combining the populations of the farming villages and the castle town, the population was over 16,000 people. The Elwyn territory still had plenty of unused fertile land to be cultivated, and the target development of a 50,000 population did not seem like a dream anymore. But given that harvest season would soon be over, and that it would be a big harvest, Albert was convinced that they could pull around 2,000 mobilized soldiers. Albert was later called to perform his nightly duties and had fun as usual, but his enjoyment didn't last so long when a castle guard rushed in, panicked. Albert was surprised because this was so soon and harvest season wasn't over yet. Several weeks ago in the kingdom of Alexa, at Orgis' mansion, the Prime Minister, Zahn, who was reporting to Orgis, shared that the kingdom's army had been dispatched. The prince was furious that he had been waiting for months only to mobilize 5,000 soldiers, so Albert explained that there was strong opposition from the local lords, who were exhausted from the continuous wars with Prince Orgis. If they could only reclaim the 3 territories from the empire during the operation, perhaps the king would be pleased. The prime minister affirmed what his dumb prince was thinking, saying that with Orgis as the army's supreme commander, they were requesting that he come to Tiana and take command of the soldiers. However, Orgis said there was absolutely no way he would be heading to a bloody battlefield, so the prime minister suggested that he request to become the supreme commander. Just then, an urgent report from the imperial capital that a certain Lord Stefan's territory had been attacked, and they were requesting immediate reinforcements. Surprisingly, the prince told the prime minister to go to Tiana in his place, and said he would relay the orders from his own castle, so he should go invade immediately. Shocked, the prime minister told him that it was still harvest season, but the stupid prince told him to shut up and not argue, and the guy was terrified into doing what he was told. Now Albert, from where he was just living his lovely life, but Prince Orgis blamed him for the stupid letter he sent that forced him to be in a difficult position. In any case, the prince only had to be patient for 1 month so he could reclaim the 3 territories belonging to those 3 corrupt lords he set up. Another thing was that he had to find out Albert's location and track down his brother, Prince Goran, who had been placing him in a difficult position. And finally, he would take both Albert's and Goran's lives so he could rest. With all of Albert's plans having gone to pieces, he found himself in a chaotic situation where Mary was commanding her soldiers to prepare for battle. This was completely bad for Albert because his prediction was completely off. Now they had to gather intel for the upcoming battle faster, even though they had already started preparing because they planned to go to war during the harvest season and with the enemy's commander still in the capital. Currently, the enemy numbered around 50,000, and Stefan's forces amounted to 3,000. With proper reinforcements, Albert believed they would be able to properly defend, but because of the harvest season, they were severely underprepared, and if these people suddenly attacked to reclaim the territory, all of their hard work would have been a waste. The worst thing was that the new territories may be punished for allowing people like Orgis to usurp them in the first place. So yet again, Orgis had outsmarted Albert. Mary could tell that her husband was bothered about something, so she asked him what was wrong, and he told her he was just mulling over strategies. However, Mary shared with him that she had been eagerly waiting for the battle for ages, even though it would take a few days to round up the peasant soldiers. But for now, the demon tribe's vassals were ready and itching for battle, because they could easily crush the advancing enemy. Rather also said he was itching for a fight because that would be his first real battle, while Preston pitched to him that he would be the one shining in the upcoming battle. Excitedly, all members of the demon tribe celebrated that they would finally enjoy the fight of their lives. Albert was somehow relaxed to see this, realizing he had been worrying for nothing because the army in his presence was by far the strongest. In fact, his own army knew the lay of the land from previous battles, and since the enemy force was mainly peasant soldiers, their commander was nowhere to be seen, and so the morale among them was quite low. Definitely, Albert was convinced that there were ways to overcome the quagmire, and then it was decided. He said the first squad with 100 members would be commanded by Mary, the second squad with 75 would be commanded by Preston, and the third with 50 members would be commanded by Rather. Albert said that he would take charge of the wagon supply unit, and since it was a full cavalry unit, he had no need for peasant soldiers. Melvis aired his concerns to Albert, saying he fully understood the strength of the demon tribe could not be overemphasized, but there was a significant difference in numbers that could be too great. But Albert reassured him that he had a plan, and the wagons would only be carrying the bare essential food supplies, so all Melvis had to do was load as many long spears as he could. Also, Albert told Melvis that he would be leaving him in charge in his absence. Thereafter, Mary displayed more excitement at the fact that she would finally have another decent fight, as her sword had been thirsty for some weakling blood. With that, she ordered the demon army to charge, and so again, the battle that was to decide Albert's fate began. At the battleground, those hideous human soldiers dared to believe they stood a chance at defeating the demon army, but the demon army retorted, saying they only managed because the humans weren't paying any attention. Seeing everyone worked up, Stefan, who was the frontier defense commander, asked Albert what he planned to do about the situation. It was obvious that Stefan was mad, so Albert first calmed him down, telling him to rest assured that even though the situation looked a little bleak, they had a strong force consisting of about 2,700 at the fortress, with 300 at each of the other fortresses. The enemy was only 3,000 strong in the vanguard and 2,000 to the rear, and if their entire force attacked at once and pushed the demons out of their stronghold, then each of the other castles would probably fall soon after. However, since most of the enemy was composed of peasants who were forced to enlist, there were no real commanders, let alone the commander-in-chief, so Albert was not expecting them to make any decisive moves. Again, in order to gain the upper hand in the battle, he released the hunting dogs, obviously none other than Mary and her uncle Preston, and so he could promise Stefan that they would soon see movement. Meanwhile, at the Alexa Army rearguard camp, a knight reported that they had received orders to advance the flank. However, Bazin told him to ignore those orders because he wasn't going to take any order from the moron Bedouin, and so they should leave the castle siege to the vanguard. In fact, Bazin felt they could make up for the harvest loss by looting, and he couldn't even wait for the slave hunt because he knew demon women would ride anything, man or beast, to death. But just then, while he was resting and basking in his idiocy, he was informed by the same night that there were reports of an attack from the rear. Before Bazin knew it, Mary was riding in with her soldiers and headed in his direction with a force that couldn't be stopped. And so this was shocking him, and he wondered why the bloodthirsty demon princess was there. It turns out that earlier that morning, Albert, Preston, and Mary had drafted out a plan. In the plan, Albert advised them to circle around without raising flags while aiming for the weaker soldiers at the rear. Albert said so because they could take advantage of their smaller numbers and use the same side paths the militia used to loop around the back. Mary and her uncle felt it was a little cowardly for warriors, but Albert said that in such an unfavorable battle, if they could limit casualties and lead to victory, then he was pretty sure he would be awarded first place in the order of merit. Seeing that it was going to be such a great honor, Mary and Preston complied with him to achieve his plan. And currently in the present, Lord Bazin was still in shock at the sudden appearance of Mary with her troops at his camp. His dumb knights rallied around him to protect him while Mary enjoyed her spoil, praising Albert for his smartness and giving her such a nice playground where she could chop heads off. For free. Bazin was shocked as he watched her in action, but he didn't even have enough time to express his shock as his deputy's head came rolling under Mary's sword soon after. She commanded her troops to raise the flags because their first objective had been successfully achieved. Also, she told them to hunt down every last member of the enemy's army. Knowing they weren't getting paid enough for such violence, some of the enemy soldiers decided to run away, but they could get nowhere because soon Preston's long and mighty spear was driven right through their hearts. And he told them that the only way they could run away was if they left their heads behind. Immediately, Preston went on his blood frenzy mission, decapitating and dismantling the bodies of the enemy soldiers as he desired. A lot of them saw that they could not retreat, so they advanced forward to join the vanguard. The vanguard, being led by Lord Bedwin, was informed that the rearguard had finally started its advance, and so it was time for them to attack the demon army. He noticed that the rearguard soldiers had an ungodly formation, but even for peasants, that was extremely low. In any case, he said it was time for them to crush their enemies in one fell swoop, but found it strange soon enough when he noticed that the rearguard army kept approaching at full speed, almost as if they were going to crash into his own army. It was then that he saw the demon princess and her uncle, who were chasing the poor sheep. Soon enough, he had to command all units to go with the momentum and charge. Already, fear was spreading across the battlefield, and somehow they all fled in the direction of the enemy. So they found themselves running straight into a spear wall, and it was too late for a lot of them to turn back. Albert was excited because he was seeing his strategy play out so excellently. More enemy knights kept falling for the trap, and the captain of the enemy army soon realized the trap that had been set for them, telling the others to fall back. In no time, the enemy soldiers started attacking each other, which meant it was Rather's time to act. However, it wasn't always this easy to reason with him, especially when Albert, Mary, and Preston were discussing strategies. He had been told to wait with Albert at Stefan's camp, but Rather was angry, saying that it was his first battle and he had to be on the field. However, Preston cautioned his son against defying Albert's military council, and advised that if he wanted recognition, then he would have to perform his duties properly before running his silly mouth. The boy told his dad that he was a demon tribe alpha male and didn't want to fall behind in battle. But Preston told him to shut up with his tantrum or get chopped into nice pieces. Mary chipped in, reassuring Rather that if it was Albert, he certainly had a great plan. In fact, Albert said that he was giving Rather the best job out of all three of them, and that was what made the boy comply with him. However, he gave him a condition, which was that he would stay and watch the battle very closely and find the best time to act. And if he got the right time, then Albert would certainly allow him to join the battle and go wild as he wished. Albert had done this because he knew that Rather had high leadership and charisma, so Albert wanted to train the boy to become a commander who could take charge of a large army. So in the present, Rather had appropriately identified the right time to act, so he commanded his unit to charge, and they went crazy on the battlefield with heads flying in all directions. Stefan's army didn't hesitate to join in the fun too, and they also joined to surround the army. Lord Bedouin was informed that his army had been crushed, and it was time for him to escape, but he knew that there was nowhere to escape, especially with that demon princess running towards him, fueled by her anger or a nitro boost. His head went flying soon enough, and Mary celebrated, saying she had taken the commander's head. Rather felt a bit jealous that his aunt had taken the victory, but she told him that was the difference in experience between the two of them. With that, Stefan announced that the battle had been won, and whoever surrendered would be taken as a prisoner. In only half a day, Albert had managed to lead the demon tribe army to victory, and Preston was just wondering if he could ever have devised such a cunning plan. In fact, he knew he could not only have failed at creating such an excellent strategy, but would probably have retreated and lost all of the territories. For Albert to have granted them a battle with minimal casualties where he caused the enemy to self-destruct, Stefan believed that Albert deserved to be called the treasure of wisdom, and he smiled, telling Mary she had bagged herself a fine husband. But even at that, poor Albert was the one on cleanup duty. After the battle and cleanup, Preston announced the results from the headcount competition. Rather came in third with 3 lords' heads and 5 commanders' heads. With 5 lords and 9 commanders' heads, Preston came in second. And finishing in first place, with 6 lords and 9 commanders' heads, was Mary. Albert couldn't help but laugh as the Elwyn family had a clean sweep. Even though he had targeted the enemy commander, he didn't quite believe that everything would work out so well. Before the battle, the demon tribe never made any efforts to contact any of the surrounding nobles and distanced themselves from those muscle-brained battle junkies. However, cooperation in a crisis depended on the relationships one had built beforehand, and so Albert was going to handle all of that by himself. Stefan asked Albert how the post-war cleanup was coming along. So he said he had pretty much finished that. Firstly, the noble captives they had taken for ransom had all been placed under house arrest at the mansion, and for those who couldn't pay, they would be made use of within their territory, while the rest were sold as slaves to the mines. The Elwyn family had already sold all the seized goods to the black market traders and gained substantial profit. Seeing that Albert had accomplished so much already, Stefan said he would leave all the ransom negotiations to Albert as well. Later, Mary told Albert to join them and celebrate, but he told her she had a limited budget to purchase the bottles of piss she was so obsessed with. Since Albert was being a cheapskate, Mary told her uncle to cover their drinking session with his salary, but he said that if he tried that, his wife would surely turn him into a eunuch. Rather also couldn't help because his mom controlled his entire salary. Mary was losing her mind because there was no way they could celebrate on such a miserable budget. So Albert told her that everything they needed was already there, as Stefan had already sent celebratory bottles of expired grape juice. The demon tribe's celebration lasted long into the night, and Albert had to fulfill his nighttime duties as usual, as did all the ladies. Albert worked so hard that night that his back ached so much, and he knew he wouldn't be able to work anymore if they got any more girls. Later, Irene told him that there was an issue with the ransom negotiations, so he told her that he would head over to the guy's place with Mary. In their custom, the wealthier captives would state their own ransom amount, and if their value matched their expectations, then the negotiations were complete, and as soon as the messenger brought their ransom, the captives would be released. But until then, those captives were deemed esteemed guests at their own convenience. However, if the deadline was exceeded, they would be immediately executed without fail. The strength of the demon tribe was well known, so most of the lords had offered the highest ransom they could afford. Unfortunately, there were poor lords among them. One of these lords was named Lies, and she was the head of the Alco family. The Arco territory bordered the Ashley territory to the south, and until previous generations, they had sided with the Alantia Empire. When the previous lord passed away, the only heir was a young girl named Liz. So there was serious civil unrest because people wouldn't allow a female lord. As such, Liz disguised herself as a man and took over the territory. The people took advantage of the dispute, and the girl was sent off to fight in the war. Now standing as an esteemed captive of the demon army, Liz said no one would get a single ransom out of her, because she wouldn't let her people starve just to buy her own freedom. Albert had done some investigation, which informed him that although Liz was new to the governing area, she was still loved by her people there already, and her results spoke for her. So he told her that he had come up with an interesting proposal. Of course, the proposal meant she would be spared and her territory would be under the protection of the Empire, and all she needed to do was become Mary's bedroom girl. While they were still speaking, Mary walked in on them and sampled the girl, saying she was in love with Liz's attitude already and couldn't wait to be with her. Albert told the stubborn girl to consider the benefits she stood to gain. First, the Empire would annex Alco, which would expand its domain. And if Liz became Albert's baby mama, then her child would inherit the territory of Slat and become a powerful branch of the Elwyn family. The girl was shocked that Albert and his wife were sharing her, but she had no option but to accept it. Mary didn't even waste time lifting her off the ground and showing her the good life later. Much later, Irene informed Albert that after investigating the enemy army, it was a certain group that they had suspected was behind all of it. Albert wasn't surprised because he knew that idiot of a prince couldn't work alone. So he told Irene to keep investigating the matter. But before then, she told him that Mary, Preston, and Rather were being given rewards, and that Albert had been summoned to the castle by the Emperor as well. Albert was surprised, knowing that he hadn't had any public military achievements, so it was weird he was getting called to the palace. But after remembering that Mary said the Emperor was always kind of sweet to her, he could only conclude that the Emperor wanted to evaluate him. Albert's biggest fear was that his plans to create the next Playboy Mansion had been discovered, and this Emperor, despite being quite young, was a political monster. Anyway, back at Prince Orgis's mansion, he couldn't believe the crushing defeats that had been delivered to his army, despite the 5,000 troops they had sent. The Prime Minister said that 80% of the mobilized troops did not return, and many of the lords were either murdered on the battlefield or captured. In fact, they failed to regain the 3 territories and lost the Alco territory because the head of the Alco family betrayed them. The poor Prime Minister apologized for the failure, but Orgis said no form of apology would fix that because responsibility would fall on his shoulders, and his succession plans were completely in the mud. Worst of all, it was the Elwyn family who dealt the biggest blow to their plans, especially Mary, who attacked the temple and had somehow reclaimed her title and the empire. Also, the Prime Minister reported that Mary had gotten married to Albert, so yet again, Orgis felt like stabbing himself multiple times because Albert, again, had proven to be a pain in his nerves. To make Albert regret his life, he put out a bounty on his head and increased it tenfold, saying they should bring Albert alive so he could crush him with his own hands. However, the Prime Minister told stupid Orgis that bringing Albert would be difficult since he was with the Emperor. Orgis was angry, telling him to shut the heck up and not question him, but the Prime Minister, with that disgusting look on his face, asked the prince how they planned to report their defeat to the king. Prince Orgis suggested that they impose a gag order. The plan was that anyone who had returned from the camp would be placed in a detention camp and locked up, and the king would be told that Prince Orgis's army was still locked in a fierce battle with the Empire. The Prime Minister worried about what might happen if their lies were discovered, but Prince Orgis wasn't willing to leave any trace of his failure, especially for his brother Goran. To finalize his plans, he asked the Prime Minister to seek support and assistance from those who were on their own side, while also planning to chop Albert's head off soon enough. The next scene showed the Alentia Empire, particularly the royal castle, which had been built by the Demon King over 2 centuries ago for the benefit of all persecuted demi-humans. In just a single generation, he built the powerful Alentia Empire, and from then on, it was known as the Demon King's Castle. All of the stories of the first Demon King made him seem super overpowered, so Albert wondered if he was probably reincarnated like he was. And also, it explained the unorthodox method of selecting the next Demon King. The first Demon King's children were all made the 4 royal families and his 4 highest-ranking vassals, known as the 4 Great Dukedoms. He granted all 8 of them the right to become the next Demon King, and each one of them was entitled to a vote when it came time to elect a new king. This became the new unique selection system, known as the 4 Royals and 4 Nobles system. During the election period, even external conflicts ceased so they would not permit fighting among themselves. The method was crucial to maintain the union between the strong demi-humans, and the current emperor is the one who won the fierce battle election. He was the 10th emperor of the empire, Craist von Shugmori. As Albert, Mary, Rather, and Preston all bowed before him, he commanded them to raise their faces. Albert noticed that Mary's stats were flawless, and it was no wonder that since he came into power, the kingdom of Alexa hadn't had a chance against his own kingdom. The king commended Albert for his recent battle and asked them to accept his matrimonial blessings without reservation. Albert was pleased that the king accepted his betrothal to Mary. Also, Mary, referring to him as a brother, told him to stop being so formal because they were closer than that, and he could simply say, "Congratulations." Preston nagged that the king was being too soft on Mary, even after he had put him through a difficult time arranging guards for Mary after she was exiled. As for Rather, he said he couldn't accept that his father outperformed him in the last campaign, and he should be re-evaluated based on his achievements in the first battle. Just then, the king's face showed that he wasn't pleased, and he reminded all three of them that they were in an official audience. This was because no matter how close the king was to Mary and the others, people were still watching. And that was a red flag because he might just punish someone on the spot to save his dignity. As such, Albert bowed down and sincerely apologized for the three scoundrels, saying they lacked basic etiquette and meant no disrespect to the king. Mary was confused and wondered why Albert was bowing at all, but the king said that because of Mary's insolence, Albert was willing to offer his head instead of Mary's. Albert was already sweating, ready to see his head roll, when the king smiled, saying he was only kidding and had only wanted to see how Mary's husband would react. But just as Mary had told him, Albert had proved himself to be a fine man. The king also burst out laughing, saying he had known the Elwins for such a long time and was used to it, and he would even be haunted if Mary ever greeted him with proper etiquette. Mary said she could pretend to be a lady when she had to, but the king reminded her that she had nearly murdered the fiancé he recommended for her. Again, Mary told him that her so-called former fiancé was only a pig in human clothes, and she was quite fussy when it came to looks. Preston laughed heartily, saying that it was thanks to Mary's mistake that he became the family head, in addition to being barred from taking part in any battles for 2 whole years. The Demon King said the whole thing was planned to placate and keep the other side happy, so from now on, Preston should use his strength in the service of Mary. Preston humbly accepted this, saying that it was his plan from the beginning anyway. Continuing from where he stopped, the king said that Rather's achievements during his first battle were truly impressive, and he would be awarded with a treasured sword that could cut through rock to encourage him to keep up the hard work on the battlefield. As for Albert, the king said he was surprised that a man who could tame Mary existed on the surface of their planet, because even the toughest of demons had a tough time controlling Mary's insanity. However, she found herself an excellent rider and knight while she was in exile. The king thought that the way Albert took the border castles was impressive, and his tactics in battle also proved amazing, such that even Stefan was singing praises of Albert, which was rare for Stefan, who was the godfather of all haters. Albert was surprised because he had been worried after hearing rumors of the Demon King, but it turned out that the king was just a kind, older brother figure. Now shifting to the main topic, the king asked Albert to confirm the rumors he had heard, that Albert had been sharing his matrimonial bed with women other than Mary, and that the head of the Alco family was one of those women. Albert said that he was completely devoted to Mary, so the king immediately drew his sword and almost had Albert's neck because the guy had the audacity to lie. However, Mary screamed to stop her brother, saying those ladies were her own lovers and she only lent them out to Albert. Albert wished this girl weren't that stupid, because essentially she was admitting what the king was accusing him of. With the look he saw in the king's eyes, Albert was prepared to see his head and body scattered east and west. But luckily, Mary hugged Albert at that moment, telling the king that if he was going to end her husband's life, then he would have to get through her first. The king asked her if she was trying to get exiled again, and the tension in the air made Albert realize that things could go so badly, and he had to figure out what the king wanted to hear. So Albert spoke up, saying that with all due respect, if the king chopped his head off right then the conquest of the Alexa would be set back 50 years in time. That was because if Albert held the reins to the strongest battle group of the empire, the Elwyn family, his promise was to offer many new territories to the emperor. And even if his majesty was the emperor, he had no say on the affairs between a loving husband and wife. The king seemed shocked and more disgusted at Albert's audacity to defy him, but he soon broke out in a little laugh, saying it was quite refreshing to hear those words from Albert. And that Albert was right in saying the king had no right to interfere with Mary's affairs. While sheathing his sword, The king said he would never dream of killing the man who could keep Mary under control anyway, and only wanted to know Albert's true feelings. With that, he told Mary to hand Albert over for 50,000 gold imperial coins in exchange. But Mary hugged her husband tight, saying the king was only trying to bully Albert just to torment Mary. The king said he was indeed serious about having Albert become a direct vassal of his. Normally, Albert would consider an offer like that, but serving the Demon King sounded 10 times more exhausting than serving Mary. He said that he was merely Mary's vassal, and having someone as low as himself become a direct subordinate of the king would be sure to breed contempt within his other vassals and advisors. As such, it would be best for the king not to shake the castle with such decisions. The king agreed that making such a rash decision would kick off a fuss in the castle. But Albert told him that even though he wouldn't be appointed directly under the king, then Albert would only keep serving Mary well and indirectly serving the king through the Elwyn family. Mary said that it was all thanks to the strength that Albert's wisdom shone through. So the king agreed that Albert should keep mounting that ox of a girl. He also said that the sword to Albert's neck was merely him trying to antagonize Mary, because Mary would only keep adding more girls to the bedroom anyway. However, even though he advised Albert to keep the women, he also told him to ensure to take care of all of them. By standing up and speaking his mind in the presence of the king, Albert was treated to a great feast held by the king himself. And much later, Mary treated him nicely in the other room. 2 weeks later, in the Ashley Castle, Irene brought reports from when Albert and the others were absent. Everything seemed to be going well within the territory, but the only area of concern was the slat territory belonging to the Lord of Alcove. It seemed the farmers who fled the kingdom's heavy taxes had defeated the remaining soldiers and formed groups of bandits. And this was the result of the recent war. Albert said that he would solve it his own way. He had been looking for labor for development plans, so this was perfect timing for a manhunt or recruitment drive. He later relayed the rules to Mary, and she confirmed that he had directed her to conduct a competition to see how many defeated soldiers they could finish off. However, he told her that that was not what he sent her to do, and he would punish her with more administrative duties. He then stated that what he meant was that whoever captured the most defeated soldiers alive would be the winner. Preston wanted to be granted permission to chop an arm or leg off, but Albert said that that would result in a penalty, and they only had to capture them with as many limbs intact as possible. Rather said that this time around, he would be vanguard while the others would wait their turn, but Albert told Rather to let the younger vassals get some experience too. Deep down, Mary wasn't pleased that they wouldn't just X all the soldiers and bandits. But Albert said they needed them as laborers for the construction projects. Hearing that Albert planned to work those men to death with hard labor made Mary realize that her husband was kind of scary. The plan was for the captured dudes to serve their sentence, and afterwards Albert would pay them a proper wage. But for now, they needed manpower because fighting wars consumed a lot of manpower. Rather picked up a stick, saying he didn't want to use his normal weapons because he wasn't sure he would be able to hold back from chopping someone's head off. And Mary did the same, but with a log of wood the size of a whole tree. Capturing Rather was done, and exang the soldiers was hard, but no one would be able to beat Mary and Preston with such high stats. After the previous war's success, they gained capital and new territories, so now they would be able to gain labor, which would help to develop those territories even further. Albert's ambition was to make the Elwyn family a great noble household, and that was going along quite well. As Mary's husband, he had been given a lot of authority, especially for a newcomer, so he had to accumulate achievements, prove himself, and gain the trust of the demon tribe. Otherwise, he would be resented and could end up losing his head. But for now, they had to go and forcefully persuade the refugees. At the refugee camp, Albert announced that the refugees had now all been taken into custody by him, and they were not in any position to refuse. They would be of no use to him or his domain with such malnourished bodies, so food would be distributed to them, and they were ordered to eat until they couldn't eat anymore. As the soldiers distributed the food, the refugees hungrily consumed it because it had been the first time they had eaten in over a week, and they were also surprised that they were being well fed by the Alanchian people. Albert further enlightened them that his household had plenty of good food, and now that they had tasted his juicy meat, They should know they would never return to Alexia ever again because he now owned them and would ensure they survived no matter what. Now that their bellies were full, he issued them clean clothes, saying the rags they were dressed in would be incinerated, and if anyone refused to change into the new set of clothes, they would be struck down on the spot. These guys were really feeling Albert and his hospitality and couldn't believe that they were even getting some nice clothes, even though they were just refugees. Albert told them, though, that now they would definitely never return to Alexia, so they should just peacefully resolve to live desperately within his domain. The guys were dismayed that they would be slaves for the rest of their lives, but since staying there meant clothing and food, they would rather be slaves who were well-fed than people who were free and starving to death. But Albert still had one more thing up his sleeve. He announced to them that the kingdom of Alexa may have been their homeland, but it was a country that never gave them a chance of survival. However, the Elwyn family was totally different, because by becoming Albert's subjects, they would be excluded from paying taxes for 3 years. During that time, food, clothing, and farming tools would be provided to them, and they would be given new fertile agricultural land as well. Albert promised that if he failed to deliver on any of his promises, they could have his head in exchange, and all who became his loyal subjects would be provided with binding documents. Without hesitation, a number of the refugees were down to die with Albert, and said the kingdom of Alexa could go to blazes for all they cared. Together, they unanimously chanted that they would never go back to Alexa ever again, and their solidarity was for Albert. With that, Albert told them that whoever wanted to prosper with the Elwyn family should join him. And even though it would take hard work, the Elwyn family would provide everything they needed to create a thriving pioneer village. They all lined up, and the rest was up to the guards. It seemed Albert's plan had worked out well. Since all these refugees could offer was their labor, if they could create waterways around the fertile land in their village, the revenue gained from the grain would be quite considerable. Sending the refugees to existing settlements at that moment would cause problems, but having them create a pioneer village from scratch would mean they would work hard to develop the area without any conflicts with any of the other villagers in the area. So rounding up all the defeated soldiers, also known as the refugee manhunt, ended up being a roaring success for recruitment. The subjugation report showed the number of people who were captured and who lost their lives. But Albert was pleased because the numbers were good. Rathor's units captured the largest number of people, and he seemed to have effective control over his unit. However, Mary and Preston shed way more blood than Rathor did. So Albert was of the opinion that Rathor should get vanguard for the next battle. Albert also went through the refugee census report, and the people were divided into the waterway building group and the pioneer village building group. As promised, Albert would waive taxes for the first 3 years, but even though the villagers would receive help with materials, they had the monumental task of building a village and waterways from scratch. But the profits they would generate against the amount invested will likely become the top money-making strategy in the kingdom once they are up and running. Meanwhile, in the royal capital of Alexa, at the residence of Orgis, the third prince, he shamed the Prime Minister Zazan for recklessly showing his useless face after being defeated. But Zazan said he brought a priest named Oxna, who had been supporting Orgis from behind the scenes. The guy belonged to a group known as the Hero's Sword, and he wanted to mobilize some mountain tribes for the Second Great Holy War and was requesting Orgis's assistance. Orgis said that Oxna could have just increased the number of followers to ensure his victory in the Holy War. But Oxna shared that during the First War, the number of followers who passed away was incalculable, and it was impossible to recruit more followers from the general populace. In his thoughts, Orgis thought of the priest as yet another stupid man he had to deal with, but he planned to make use of him for the time being. He confirmed that Oxna wanted to mobilize the mountain people since he had run out of followers, and the priest said that for the Holy War, if they mobilized all the mountain people who had sworn allegiance to the Hero's Sword, they would have over 1,500 soldiers ready to attack on their command, and that the swords would be pointing at Albert and his cringy group of freaks. If they created a scenario where they couldn't ally themselves with Stefan, they had a good chance of reclaiming all 3 territories with just regular armed forces. It wasn't a bad idea, but everyone knew that Prince Orgis never gave anyone anything for free, so the priest offered him 2 Hawaiian baddies to grease his old rusty rod. With no hesitation, Orgis accepted the gift and told Zazen to allocate a portion of Alexis' army and supplies to assist the mountain people. He also told him to assign the reorganization of their military in Tiana to a certain Lord Bralish, while Zazen himself will stay behind in the capital. With that, the priest returned, leaving Orgis with the girls. Later, the prince visited his father, the sick king, who wondered whether Orgis was managing his political duties well. Orgis said that with Zazen beside him, everything was progressing quite well. But just then, his brother showed up, saying he heard that the army sent by the royals to reclaim those territories suffered a devastating defeat, and that in Tiana, the enemy had gathered the defeated soldiers and brought them into the fold. If that was true, then Orgis would be responsible for his actions, since he was the one who forced the battle so hastily. Orgis confronted Goran, asking what he was on about because their army should still be locked in the midst of battle. He insisted that the kingdom's army was still going strong and was fighting back to take the 3 territories, and that Goran had clearly been deceived by false information. Thereafter, Orgis told his dad that Goran was easily manipulated by the enemy's misinformation schemes, and as long as Orgis himself was in command, the kingdom's army would not suffer, so his father could rest assured and focus on his recovery. The liar added that some of the troops involved were back in Tiana for some rest and recovery, and all the enemy was doing was spreading rumors of a defeat and retreat. Orgis' father said that since the guy claimed that as long as he was in command, the army would never face defeat under his command. He would have to keep to his word, and that would become his strength to rule as king for many years to come. And afterwards, the king said he was counting on Orgis. As he left the room, Orgis commanded the guards not to permit Goran into the king's bedroom. Goran, on the other hand, discussed with someone, saying that Orgis looked like he was lying about their army being defeated by Albert's army. And that meant the contents of Albert's letter were also true. Since it was all Orgis who forced the entire operation, Goran wanted him to be accountable. But with their father being bedridden and his brother being in charge of the government, there was very little Goran himself could do. His aide advised that now was the time to increase their number of allies. It wasn't done speaking when a letter from Albert came in, where Albert advised Goran to steer clear of the hero's sword and prevent any of its members from getting close to him. Goran's image confirmed that Lord Oxnard had been calling for a second holy war, even after he had sent the majority of his believers to their pointless deaths in the first invasion attempt. This pointed to the level of corruption in that organization, which was far worse than the one going on in the temples of the Alexa kingdom. Goran instructed his ally to cut ties with any other noble who had connections with the hero's sword. And once their conversation was final, Goran thought about Albert, realizing that he would have benefited from Albert's wisdom and ascended the throne far more easily. Meanwhile, in the Ashley castle, Mary got about whining about how she didn't want to work and would rather have fun with her girls. But Alicia reminded Mary that she had promised Albert that if he gave her at least 3 satisfactory rounds, she would do some proper work. In fact, Albert had overfulfilled this rule and ended up giving her 6. Rather offered to help Mary with her work, and Albert said that if she threw a tantrum, Alicia would severely punish her. That led to one thing and another, and eventually Mary was getting some. Later, the next day, Irene reported on the Margie Trading Company, and Albert said that profits from the trading company should be handled separately from the main house profits, because the profits were being used as startup capital for their intelligence. Irene told him she had noticed unaccounted funds within the ledger, but since she now knew it was a front for an intelligence agency, it meant Albert may be entrusting her with something deep. He said he would deal with Prince Goran and his supporters by himself, while Irene would handle normal intelligence operations. Albert planned to make Alicia the head of the secret intelligence arm and Liz the one in charge of funding. Ultimately, he planned to raise enough funds to assist the second prince, Goran, and his faction on a much higher scale. Will Albert successfully help Goran ascend the throne and conquer the evil prince, Orgis? If you'd like to see how this plays out in Part 2, type Demon Girls Bazookas in the comment section. If you enjoyed the video, give a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for similar content. As always, thanks for watching.